Hello and welcome to the Building Slayology Potty, where we talk about better buildings to live and breathe in. Today on the show, I'm joined by two voices you may already know if you're into high-performance buildings and Passive House. Matthew Cutler and Zach Semke are the co-hosts of the Passive House podcast, where they share insights from experts all over the world who are pushing the boundaries of building performance. Zach is also the driving force behind Reimagining Buildings, a YouTube channel and movement dedicated to making better buildings the norm, not the exception. Between the two of them, they have been amplifying stories, ideas, and the technical know-how that are reshaping how we think about comfort, health, and sustainability in the built environment. Today, we'll dive into what motivates their work, the lessons they've learned from talking to so many change makers, and what the future of buildings could look like if we dare to reimagine them. Welcome to the show, gents.
Kia ora.
Thank
Thank you.
Great to have you.
Great to be here.
So, could you both, we'll start with you, Matthew, share a little bit about your career and your journey into high performance buildings?
Sure. Well, I got into buildings after doing an engineering degree. It was a sort of second attempt at university for me, and it was a sort of environmental engineering. I really wanted to do something around energy because I thought energy was sexy, as opposed to water and just sustainability, environmental management in general. And of course, we have a bit of a connection with Adelaide, Jess, which is
We do.
where you are now, where I
Adelaide
grew up.
buddies. Yep.
Adelaide being, or South Australia being the driest state in Australia, which is the driest continent. So waters was top of mind, but I just didn't think it was that sexy. I still think it is, and I think water and ecology in general, environmental sustainability as it's I think is still the valid term, was appealing. But because I was interested in energy, I eventually found myself working in the space of trying to make existing buildings more energy efficient. But what I've learned and what we might get onto is the fact that it's more and more about health and comfort is kind of tends to be where we're at. So that's kind of the built environment. And if you hang around that space long enough and are interested in trying to work out how to do buildings better, particularly homes, I think you eventually end up at Passive House.
Yeah. Eventually, I think you probably do, ultimately. And, you kind of pick your point somewhere along that line as to where you're going to land, but eventually you do get there.
All roads lead to Passive House.
Pretty
Yeah.
much.
Zach, how about yourself? So you're joining us from the US today.
Yes, I'm based in Seattle, Washington, in the
Mhm.
beautiful Pacific Northwest. And my story about my introduction to Passive House actually echoes the story of a lot of people that we've interviewed, which is that the Great Recession kind of forced a big, shift and upheaval in my career. And that's when I found Passive House. That I studied human ecology back in college many years ago and was involved in my first work was involved in policy advocacy around progressive regional planning. So working toward more more density in urban spaces and having transportation options like light rail and buses and bikes and green spaces and affordable housing and all these kinds of things. And I was doing that in Portland, Oregon, which at the time, this was in the 90s, at the time was a real mecca for urban planning geeks around the country. And so that was my first work. But then I kind of took a detour. My wife and I started a Japanese drumming group in Portland, and that took over. So it was Portland Taiko was my life for like 11 years, which is very fun and crazy and awesome and all consuming. But I went back to school in 2005 to study. And I wanted to do landscape architecture, landscape design, and create public spaces where people could come together. So it was a little bit of a combination of my interest in performing arts and bringing audiences together, and then my interest in urban planning. And so I did that and was working for an architecture firm in Portland when the Great Recession happened. And I was like, and I loved school, but I also was I loved graduate school and landscape design, but it's also very clear that I was a brand new player in all this. And there were tons of landscape architects who were out of work. And I felt like, I'm just going to look for any work right now because maybe this is the Great Depression. I don't know. And so that's when I landed at Hammer and Hand, which is a building company in Portland and now in Seattle that at the time was building some of the very first passive house projects in the Northwest. And in short order, I got to start learning about passive house as well as home performance, which is kind of on the other end of the continuum of building science and building practice, and write about it and start documenting projects with video and kind of we had this the firm had this very long view of marketing. So I'm going way too far into this, but that was my entree. It was the Great Recession kind of shook things up, and so I needed to kind of reinvent myself. And like many people in this community in different ways, that's how Passive House became part of my life.
Yeah, right. And so, how did you guys actually meet? And then the Passive House podcast was born. Take us there. Because you're in the US and Matt, you're in Australia. Oh, no, sorry, New Zealand. Fill in some
It's
blanks
all
for us.
Matthew. It was the whole it was completely his brainchild. I got yeah.
That does not surprise me.
The Passive House Live started, I think, just as COVID was hitting, and
So
I've been
basically,
to
like these global crises is what's propelled your careers forward.
Kinda
Basically.
has.
Exactly.
It
Yeah,
kinda
there-
has.
I think there's a
Yeah.
With the
there's
GFC
a
and
through line
COVID.
here.
Yep. So I'd been to a few Passive House conferences, spoken to people like Elrond Burrell, had played around with a bit of podcasting myself, looking at just sort of better homes, and I realized that nobody was doing a specialized Passive House podcast at the time, and then I wasn't quite stuck in the office, but a lot of stuff was going online. Passive House Live started up, which was amazing because suddenly have this community of people, great presentations. It was a really good format of having a presentation for 20 minutes or so, but then people would stick around sometimes for, I don't know, Zach, it was over an hour sometimes that people would just be chatting
So
because in your
I mean,
time
in
zone,
the early days,
in the
when
early
it
days, it was a
started,
couple
hours actually. Yeah.
you guys were
Wow.
drinking beer and I was drinking coffee. And so people would just hang around. Eventually, I'd have to leave because it was during my work day and I'd have to go and do some work. But these guys would just carry on. I thought this is such a great community. So I reached out to Zach and say, hey, I've been thinking about doing a dedicated Passive House podcast. How about, is there an opportunity to combine it with all the great stuff that was starting to happen with Michael Ingwe kicking off Passive House Live and Zach and the whole team, the whole cast that were doing that. And it kind of just grew. Zach said yes. And we started.
Yeah,
Excellent.
that's right. Yeah.
I love that.
It was when Matthew approached me, I was like, of course. I
Yeah.
have no idea how to do a podcast, but let's do a podcast.
Yeah,
It's definitely in that moment.
That's how mine
that's
started.
kind of yeah, exactly.
No idea what I'm doing. Yeah, awesome. Well, all of this information sharing happening online is brilliant. So, it's only serving to keep propelling the industry forward. So, thank you, gentlemen, for your contribution. I follow the podcast. I have been on the podcast. So, thank you for coming on mine.
Absolutely, it's great to be here.
So, you've interviewed so many industry leaders. Do you have one conversation that stuck with you, and why? Who wants to go first? Zach, you can go first this time.
There you go first, Zach. Good luck.
I was just looking at the podcast, and I think we have when we have all the bonus episodes as well, we have like 400 something episodes. So it's a lot. There's a lot to draw from. So it's really hard to choose. But Sarah Lewis of Passive House Trust was, and I actually didn't conduct the interview. That it was an interview that Mary James and Jay Fox, who are co-hosts, conducted. But I am just, well, first of all, I'm just so impressed by the Passive House Trust and really compelled by Sarah's work and the impact that she's having among, a team of people on policy making in Scotland and that whole process. I also was struck by her kind of clear-eyed view about the challenge of doing full-on Passive House interfit retrofits and the recognition that those are really important and kind of lighthouse projects. And we also need to be thinking about what can we scale in retrofits. So that's like, I just think that's a really interesting question that all of us are grappling with. And yeah, she's brilliant. So that was a highlight for me.
So your question, one of your sort of main questions is how to scale the improvement of the existing housing stock rather
That's
than
right. That's right.
yeah.
And and understanding that an interfit retrofit is hard.
Yeah.
So and so what can we do with the buildings that don't do interfit? Would be
Mhm.
one way to phrase that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. How about you, Matthew?
Yeah, so many, very hard to choose, but I've gone back into the archives and Nikita Reed was it was in the 80s, episode 80. So a few years ago now. But one of the things that I've been really impressed, and a shout out to our other co-hosts, Mary James and Ilka Cassidy, who have sought out over the 3 or 4 years these amazing women, particularly who are doing just incredible stuff out in the industry. And we've had the opportunity to talk to people not necessarily from a technical passive house origin, but are finding ways to influence the built environment and having all these amazing other impacts in society. And Nikita is also another fellow podcaster. So you should definitely check her out online. She
Okay, what's her
runs
podcast called?
a podcast called Tangible Remnants, and
Okay. I'll
she's
link
all
that in the
about,
show notes.
yeah, she focuses a lot on the one of the biggest challenges is how do we adapt what already exists, so fixing up existing buildings, but she's done some really good work on historic preservation that includes sustainability, bringing now carbon into that equation as well. But on top of all that, looking at, in her case in particular, American history and particularly the African American experience and how that influences the built environment and how the built environment can have positive outcomes for so much more than just someone's power bill. So yeah, just one example. There are
Yeah.
lots of others, but it's a privilege, I think, to talk to amazing people like Nikita.
Okay. All right. I'll
Very good.
definitely go back and have a listen to that one, and I will link it in the show notes for anyone who, pardon me, who is interested. Funnily enough, you've both touched on existing building stock. I think when I first got into air tightness testing and all of that building performance stuff, it was actually around existing building stock as well. Because you can blow it or test an existing home and improve it pretty easily. So that's kind of where my head was at as well when I started on this journey way back when.
Very cool.
So co-hosting this podcast means that you've both got a front row seat. You said you've got 400 interviews in the bank. That's the phenomenal number of conversations. You've got a front row seat to what's going on in the industry and global building innovation. Where do you see the untapped opportunities that we're not talking about enough yet?
For me, I mean, there are so many, and there's lots of emerging stuff, particularly around carbon. I think money is what makes the world go round, and figuring out how to finance buildings better and better building, I think, is one of the big issues, but also a big opportunity. And we've also talked to sort of people who have come from a property development side, and they see the economics of passive house. And there's also people like Emma Edmondson, who's managed to convince local councils around the UK of the wider societal economic benefits. So I think tapping into the whole financing side, whatever that looks like in people's particular jurisdiction, wherever they're designing and building. Sometimes that can be grant funding. Look, I mean, there have been, and I think still are, some pretty amazing funding opportunities available in the States. But it is also just making a really good business case. And the more we can do that, and in our space, we tend to get a bit idealistic, but we need to realize that we're playing in a very capitalist environment of property. So we need to try and craft that message as much as we can that it makes financial sense, because in a lot of cases it really does. But a lot of people just focus on cost without necessarily looking at the value side, and that value side of the equation really does often make passive house a bit of a no-brainer.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Zach, what's your take on that? What's your untapped opportunity?
The untapped opportunity. So I feel like there is a lot of value to taking the systems thinking of passive house, like at at the building level that I think a lot of us are probably familiar with, and applying that to the bigger picture. And so when I mean the bigger picture, I mean essentially resilience and decarbonization, and
Mhm.
the relationship between buildings and the clean energy transition, between efficiency and embodied carbon. And I think that there are right now the untapped potential has to do with the fact that I think there are kind of misperceptions about embodied carbon and energy efficiency somehow being at rather than actually lowering embodied carbon and improving energy efficiency can go hand in hand. And also that say, if you have a clean energy grid, passive house isn't important. The reality that we're seeing, at least in North America, is that the better energy performance and kind of the building as a thermal battery is something that really supports the clean energy transition. So I think that speaks to just sort of a larger issue or opportunity, and that is one where I think we can really be doing a better job of um, working outside of our silos. So working outside of the
Yeah.
passive house silo and connecting with all the people who really care about buildings and climate and resilience, who are really focused on materials and embodied carbon, or who are really focused on clean energy. I really see a lot of ways that all of those different components of building a better future are truly self or mutually reinforcing. And I think that I'm eager to see that kind of awareness increase.
Um, it's definitely of interest, but I think, Matthew, what you say about the dollar being the bottom line is definitely the case. And there are some big banks in Australia who are giving lower interest rates, for example, for better star ratings and things like that. But passive house is still very much on the fringes of what people are willing to do and look at, which is the untapped opportunity for me. And I don't know where this quite lands for society in terms of like what, you know, it baffles my mind that there's not a stronger connection between the health industry and the building industry. So there needs, like, in terms of working in our silos, Zach, the connection between those two parts of the world, those in all countries in the world, needs to be a lot stronger. And passive house is definitely a connecting force for that conversation. Because for me, passive house is much more about building health than it is about energy costs. Because if you've got an unhealthy building or a moldy building, or a building that's not supporting your family's well-being, then really the cost of your electricity is neither here nor there.
Right. I think building resilience is also something that's really coming to the fore for us, especially in the West, and I imagine in Australia as well, right? And with the wildfires that we've been experiencing and the smoke, we actually had a pretty good summer this summer, but we did just get hit by a few days of fairly bad smoke. It can get really bad, and those, having a passive house really helps maintain a comfortable, healthy interior environment, especially if you have a little extra filtration on your HRV or ERV. And so I think that there are more and more people are becoming aware of bad air outside and figuring out how to protect themselves from that bad air outside. And our
Yeah,
current, existing building stock doesn't really do that. So I think there's an opening there for some progress in buildings.
for sure. Passive House Conference, not this year, but last year, I think it was. There was a presentation by a lady who built a certified passive house childcare centre, and that was in Melbourne? Maybe it was in a location where they had a lot of bushfires in the previous bushfire season, and that childcare centre was used as a safe place for everyone to go because you could
Ah,
breathe in the inside. Yeah, so that spoke volumes. That anecdote spoke volumes to me, and at the same time, I had a friend who was living in Canberra, and they had a newborn baby, and there was bushfires, and the bushfires were quite some distance away, but the smoke was travelling a long way, and they had to tape up their windows and doors because the smoke was coming inside from kilometres and kilometres away, and they had this newborn baby that was, vulnerable. So these
yeah.
two anecdotes happening at the same time, it really did illuminate the issue.
We've done a whole series, Zach, on the the air filtration boxes, which
Yeah,
you
I
had
had
to.
mine out. Yeah,
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 Say more.
yeah. We've
What's
got
this?
this. Yeah, it's a. Well, do you want to explain it, Matthew?
I can't remember the name. What are they? What are they?
Yeah, Corsi. I think there are a couple of names. They're named after the people who helped develop them, but Corsi Rosenthal box is one name where
If you
you
search
take
up,
a box stand. Yeah.
yeah, if you search up for those boxes, you get lots of recipes online because people have basically created these plans of how to make your own filtration box because it got so bad, and particularly in your region. I had looked at some of the outdoor air quality maps, Zach, and you've told the story about how you were basically choosing between, do I have high CO2 internally because I've got everything closed, or do I breathe in essentially toxic air from outside? And that was the choice people were having to make.
That's often the choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll have to link whatever those boxes are in the show notes. I'll find out more afterwards as well, so we can look into that. Anyone who
Yeah.
is interested in DIY
Well,
air filtration.
Exactly.
An unfortunate requirement of fixing a symptom, whereas the benefits of being in a passive house is that you don't need that because the house has got its own built-in filtration system and fresh air supply, and this is becoming particularly relevant in a lot of areas around Australia where that wildfire and bushfires are a real concern. And it's not just about survivability; it's also about livability during those events because the smoke can spread a long way. It's also relevant to people if you're just near a main motorway, a highway, big road, industrial area, whatever. Outdoor air is not always as clean and healthy as we think it is. And
No, and I have to
a
say,
passive house can help with that and protect people on the inside.
It's not something that occurred to me. It doesn't. It's invisible.
Yeah.
Air tightness is invisible. CO2 is invisible. Particulate matter is invisible. It's all invisible until you start measuring it.
Well,
You don't really
until
know
you
what's
pull
around
out
you.
your filters on your ventilation system and see the crap that you would otherwise have been breathing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or your indoor air quality monitor with numbers on it. So how do you balance the technical depth of the Passive House podcast with making the content accessible and inspiring to your audience and to a broad audience too, not just the Passive House audience?
I was thinking about this and I'm not sure that we always do.
I hope we're accessible and inspiring.
Yeah,
sure
I
we
mean,
always
one of
are.
the things that I when I'm talking to particularly architects and people kind of in the passive house tent, I often talk to them either openly or the way I try talking to them is thinking about how can I help them to communicate to their clients and to that wider audience, because I think a lot of our audience is in sort of the passive house space and it's sort of people within our network, but I try and encourage those people to think about better ways to communicate to their audience, which is sort of the next degree of communication. And this is something that I know Zach has thought a lot about. And in fact, that was the genesis behind creating a whole bunch of resources early on that were Creative Commons licenses. So some visual aids for helping people to talk about what Passive House is, because a lot of we just saw a lot of the same old videos that were popping up whenever someone decided to talk about Passive House. It was always the same video that people were showing. So Passive House Accelerator's got some great resources that are freely available that really help with that communication process.
So before we move on, tell us what Passive House Accelerator is different to. That's the supporting entity for the podcast? What's the relationship?
Yes. So Passive House Accelerator is a media company, essentially.
Yep.
So
Okay.
we do original articles every week, published to the website and distributed through the mailing list. We have Passive House Accelerator Live that Matthew was referring to. So it was that grew straight out of the second week of COVID. It was at that time known as the Global Passive House Happy Hour. So that's a kind of a mainstay or really at the heart of who the accelerator is that weekly live program.
Yep.
And we have the podcast, and then we have a couple of YouTube channels. One is the Reimagining Buildings channel, which is more like explainers and documentary style, pieces about projects. And then the Passive House Accelerator channel is where we have the archive and the library of all of the different presentations that have happened on our live programming. So many hundreds of videos there.
Yep.
With a bunch of stuff. So that
it's a
the
three-pronged
accelerators,
approach.
all of those things. Yeah. And then the Reimagine Buildings Collective is an outgrowth of the Passive House Accelerator. And that's our membership community for
Okay.
builders and designers and change makers. Yeah.
All right. Again, information will all be linked in the show notes. So if you want to get involved with the Passive House Accelerator, the Reimagine Buildings, the podcast, and what was the other one?
The Passive House Accelerator Live, maybe.
The
Reimagine Buildings Collective, the community.
The collective one. Yeah.
The collective.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. All of that will be linked. So check it out and
Yeah.
and get involved because you've got a lot to learn with these gentlemen. So Zach, your take on balancing the content and making it accessible.
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree with Matthew. I think that it's hard to do that. But on the other hand, like Matthew's an engineer, I'm not. I don't have a technical background, so it's hard for me to go all that technical on my own. So I think
But that's okay.
maybe I geek out when it's straight. No, it's great. It's
that's
great.
Definitely
I think that is there's a place.
That in itself
there's a place
is more accessible
for those of us. Right.
Yeah.
Maybe a little, we're maybe able to talk about it differently. Yeah. So, but I mean, I think it is. I mean, our main audience are practitioners. So I think it's okay that it gets a little bit technical, and I agree with Matthew that I think it's important for us as a community to figure out how to speak plainly about the benefits of Passive House in a way that is compelling and speaks to people's needs and wants.
Absolutely, because honestly, people don't care about 15 kilowatt hours per square meter.
No.
They don't care. That means nothing to most people. What they care about is how it feels thermally, how it feels mentally, and how it feels to their health. It's time for a quick sponsor shout out. Today's episode of the Building Sciology Potty is proudly brought to you by our amazing sponsors, Enduro Builders and Climasure. A huge thank you to these incredible businesses for supporting the podcast and helping us spread the word about better buildings to live and breathe in. Your support makes this podcast possible. Please head over to their websites and follow their social pages.
Yeah, exactly.
And their back pocket, of course, the bank balance. Yeah. All right. Zach, speaking of Reimagine Buildings, could you talk us through the vision behind that and what you are hoping to achieve with it?
Yeah, so Reimagine Buildings is a term that we started using with that podcast channel, partly as a way to start to reach beyond Passive House. And I think Passive House, is beginning to get some name recognition, and people are starting to understand it as a brand and respect it as a brand. But it wouldn't be your first choice if you were going to go to like a marketing agency and say, hey, I have this really amazing approach to buildings that could like change the world. What should I call it? Passive House is probably not the greatest term. And it's not just for houses, and it's actually not entirely passive. And I know passive is sort of it has this negative, it's not a great label. So Reimagine Buildings, I think that was the first time that we used it, was for that YouTube channel. And then we started using it at the Reimagine Buildings 24. Okay, so we did it a year ago. We did an online 24-hour around the world conference called Reimagine Buildings 24. For that's when we also started thinking, hey, we want to have this sense of community continuing between these episodic online conferences that we're doing. So that's when we created the online community called the Reimagine Buildings Collective.
Got it.
So it's about being inclusive of things like upfront carbon and embodied carbon. People who really care about natural materials or really care about electrification. It's recognizing that Passive House is one element to what we need to work toward for clean and resilient buildings. So there's Passive House, there's embodied carbon, there's electrification, there's clean energy, there's making sure you're retrofitting, you're not using too much stuff. I mean, there's a lot of things. And so Reimagine Buildings is kind of embraces all of that in its name, and it's very flexible in its name. And so we get to do things like next week on September 19th, we're doing the Reimagine Buildings Massive Impact Conference.
Yes.
This program by Kim Davis. Kim Davis is our programming manager. She just does an amazing job with this. So a bunch of heavy hitters who are, these are people who are moving beyond this notion of incremental change and saying, hey, we need to be taking some leaps in our work to really make a difference and really make an impact. And there are, one of the shining stories of that kind of sensibility and what that can do in terms of impacting the world is what happened in Massachusetts, where several years ago, there was just one, like, I don't know, 25, 30 unit multifamily building, passive house building, that provided a proof of concept that then other organizers and passive house advocates and people who were worried about climate and buildings started to organize around. And that has resulted in building code change in Massachusetts that is mandating passive house for buildings of multifamily buildings of 12,000 square feet or larger. So this
Wow.
one building, the early movers who took the risk to make that building have helped set off in motion this pathway that's resulted in this really incredible thing going on in Massachusetts. And like, they have now 22.5 million square feet of multifamily passive house proposed. And if that all got built, that would triple the built passive house buildings in the United States. So it's just a
In the
total
United
step jump
States.
in the United
The
States.
whole United
All
States.
of the United States. That's just what's proposed
Wow.
right now in one state. So there's this opportunity to make a massive impact. And so that's one story. There are lots of other different stories. And so it's this story. These are examples that range from big high rises to that, passive house retrofit, but they're basically celebrating the fact that when we make these moves, and they can be uncomfortable and challenging and taxing on us, but when we make these moves, we can make an outsized impact on the world and move things in the right direction. So there are going to be a bunch of really cool case studies about that at that conference, and we're really looking forward to it.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. So it's sort of like a little bit like, let's stop mucking around, people. Let's get this done.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Let's stop talking
Definitely.
and let's start doing.
And we're in a somewhat challenging moment here in the United States that we don't need to go into, but the fact remains that we have a lot. We actually do have a lot because state policy governs buildings, not federal policy. We have agency.
Yeah.
Members of the architectural and engineering construction industry can really make an impact, and so let's do it.
And you've been asking for people to send in questions or proposals or ideas. Are they flooding in?
They are,
Yeah.
and they're great questions, and they're challenging.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
I mean, that's it. Yeah, I think it's fair to recognize that this isn't always easy to do this work, but I think that's what is so amazing to see when we see examples like what's gone on in Massachusetts or New York or Vancouver, BC. I mean, a lot of this got set off in what was going on in Brussels. Then I think can buoy us and recognize, okay, I know that this isn't always easy, but I need to work toward, even if it's a small move, a small change, make that happen.
Yeah. So this is happening on the 19th of September, which is 9 days from
That's
now,
right.
which is probably going to be
Right.
before. So this podcast episode will probably be aired after your event has happened. Is there a way that people can access that event if they want to after the fact?
Yes, absolutely. So it will
Yeah?
be recorded, and it is part of the Reimagine Buildings Collective. So
Okay.
it would be amazing if we had people join the collective. This is an online forum has people from all over the world. So that one of the benefits of being a collective member is you have access to all the recordings of all of the Reimagine Buildings conferences we do, and we're starting to do quite a few. We just did, this is I don't know, number 4 this year.
Fantastic. Well, I will put that information in the show notes again for anyone who is interested. It sounds amazing. It sounds really cool. And the whole of Reimagine Buildings notion is, in terms of accessibility, talking about the notion of accessibility, I do like the terminology. I do like it. It's sort of like
pretty.
let's rethink this. Let's let's think outside the box and let's get together and see if we can come up with something a little bit different. I like it. So, Zach, earlier you mentioned that passive house it can be a problematic term just on its own, but it can be problematic for society on a broader adoption point of view. What do you guys think the biggest barriers are to that?
So I think one of the biggest barriers to passive house is people knowing that it exists or then believing that it works. There are very few people that we talk to who have designed a passive house or builders who have built a passive house, people who have been in one, lived in one, worked in one, who ever want to go back. So it does work, and people who have experienced it in some form, whether professionally or living in or experiencing one firsthand, they get that belief. So it's a sort of a slow ripple effect, and I guess so that the biggest barrier is speed and getting more people to experience it and truly believe. What a better way of being inside a building feels like. Because like I say, once you have experienced that, it's very hard to go back to something that's not that. We hear so many anecdotal stories of people, the most heart-wrenching ones tend to be people with sick children who have battled for years and years with respiratory disease, suddenly move into a home that's good ventilation, reasonable insulation, and just works. And a lot of these symptoms disappear. And going back to what you said about linking buildings with health, Jess, we know that link is there. Quantifying it can be a little bit challenging, but it's definitely there. And the more that we can get people to really experience and feel that, I think is the way forward.
Zach, would you like to add anything?
Just that I think the challenge is that change is hard, and people are averse to change. So the challenge is one of figuring out how to move others, move ourselves and move others. And that comes down to understanding people and communicating, in a way that speaks to what they care about.
Yeah. See, I don't quite understand that aversion to change. I like change. I'm excited by change. I'm excited by what's new and exciting and what's next. So the idea of
I think
not...
Sorry, I'm interrupting, but I think that is true for a lot of us in the community. I think it's one of, and maybe it's one of the occupational hazards of when we try to communicate about this stuff. It's like, well,
I think so.
I mean, it's not just that we're a bunch of technical geeks. It's also that we really like new stuff. I mean, it's interesting. Like some of the early adopters of the first passive house single family homes are often, geeky engineer people.
Yeah.
Who are into gadgets. So anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. And it's going back to the communication piece that we talked about before. I've reflected on the fact that from the first time that I heard the words passive house and also heard someone say air tightness to when I was not quite an evangelist, but encouraging other people about how great these things are, it was probably at least a 2-year gap between those events. And I often fall into the trap that I think I can convince someone how great passive house inside 20 minutes. And I think it's very easy to forget where we've personally come from and that how long it's taken to change and having to constantly talk people through this aversion to air tightness, because who wants to live in an airtight box? But that's a conversation we just need to keep having about the benefits of air tightness, and maybe reframing it as I've heard people talk about it as maybe talking about energy tightness instead of air tightness, and having constant supply of fresh air. So thinking about how to talk about some of these terms in a bit of a way, but also the underlying thing is having empathy and realizing that for some people, particularly us engineers who like things we don't like surprises, it can take a little time to change, particularly if we've grown up around this idea of indoor-outdoor flow and having lots of connection to the outside. There's a lot of things that are potential barriers if you're just hearing about passive house and air tightness and highly insulated envelopes. It can be quite strange. And I think, I feel this is something that I talk to architects a little bit about who are in the tent. that sometimes we just have to be a little bit empathetic and realize that it might take a few conversations for someone to come around to the idea that passive houses may be a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's a slow burn. It's a slow
Yeah.
burn.
I hope it doesn't always take 2 years.
And
I'm a
that's
slow learner. So, and that's part of the great work that Zach and the team at the Accelerator are doing, are literally to accelerate that process, because we don't have that long. We can't spend 2 years convincing everyone. So a lot of what we're about is how do we condense that process down so that we can get people on board as and faster, so it doesn't take people as long as it took me.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as I found out about blow testing, I jumped on it. As soon as I found out every single step along the way, I've jumped on, building an earthship and building a tiny house and finding out about Bellador testing and going to that conference.
Yeah.
And, it's been a real, I didn't waste any time.
Blow door tests are like experiencing passive houses. That it's really hard to convince someone to do the first test, but when they've had a test, they just want more. I've had that experience with builders so many times that you offer them a free test and like, oh no, it's going to disrupt our work site. What is this? What if I fail? But as soon as you do one,
What
they're
if I
like,
fail?
when can you come back?
That's a big one.
Can you do another one? Can you test all
Oh,
those
yeah.
buildings over there?
I love it when
Yeah.
you do a blow test for a builder for the first time and they're like, whoa,
Yeah.
I never thought about that.
Yep.
Or you show them the thermal imaging camera and they're like, what? It's just exposure. The first step. Maybe I should start giving away blow tests. Okay. So let's turn to the future. You guys are quite future focused chaps. What is, from your vantage point, what emerging ideas, technologies, or trends excite you the most when it comes to transforming how we design and construct buildings?
I would say that what is exciting me right now is the growth in the use of natural materials in construction, and figuring out how to move that from sort of what might be seen as a hippy dippy space to like a standardized, this works in standard construction methods kind of way. So I think about the straw panels that are becoming more common here in North America, and the potential for it. So that has a lot of different benefits, including obviously lower toxicity, but also going back to carbon. Straw is a great way to sequester and store carbon in buildings.
Yes.
So moving away from foams and toward straws is a cool move forward. I've been learning from the folks at the Healthy Materials Lab about natural paints and moving away from acrylic paint. I just heard today from Ben Bogie, who was a guest on he's a builder and he was a guest within the collective for an interview with Michael Ingui, the founder of Passive House Accelerator. So Ben was talking about how our move away from VOCs went to, I think it was SVOCs. And what is S? S is not slow, but essentially it's away from one product that has these volatile organic compounds that release a bunch of bad crap right away and are really bad for the people who are applying the paint, to a different kind of paint where it slowly releases the bad crap. And so instead of killing the people who are painting, it kills the people who are inside the building. That's the way that was Ben's terminology.
Just kicking the can down the road a bit.
Right, exactly. So moving to the natural paints that naturally kind of calcify as well over time. Like that's another. I think that I've been excited over the last several years to see this shift. And like when I was first writing about and writing blogs and showing photos and stuff of projects, one of the first projects that Hammer and Hand did in Oregon, it just was using a massive amount of foam, and it was building a building on top of a bunch of geofoam. And foam has its place. I'm not saying that that it's always a bad idea, but it was something that we celebrated. Like I celebrated it. It was like, look, there's this truckload of foam that just arrived on the construction site, and now I'm
There's
like,
so much insulation.
Yeah, right. It's so much insulation. This is super cool. It's exciting.
Yeah.
And now I think about like all the there's a lot of upfront carbon involved in that and chemicals and stuff.
Chemicals.
So
and it burns.
It's been, right. And it burns, right. So So there's this, I think, this transition going on, and I think we're just really dialing in on what products can be durable and healthy and easily usable in standard practice, and I think that's a great move.
Yep. Yep. Even in South Australia, I did some work recently on a straw bale house and on a hempcrete house. So we're having some alternative technologies
Yeah,
appearing here a bit more,
yeah,
which is great.
yeah, awesome.
How about you, Matthew?
At the other end of the spectrum, I'm excited about some of the emerging technology, particularly around software, which is enabling designers to do really iterative design early on, because the
Mhm.
trick with making any building perform better cost effectively is getting that stuff included into the design as early as possible. And
Mhm.
in my day job, I'm doing a lot of encouraging designers to do energy modeling. And that's at the core of
Mhm.
Passive House, is using the Passive House planning package or whatever flavor of energy model that you're doing. And sometimes that gets left till the end as a sort of a check instead of an actual iterative design process. And I remember we've talked to people, way back, starting to think about, well, because a lot of that's just number crunching, and it's fairly manual work, putting in geometry. So I'm excited, and I expect to see ways of dramatically speeding that process up so that we're getting lots of parametric design and parametric analysis using software to figure out the best building for a particular location, for a particular use case, with some other parameters around, linking in quantity surveying. So you're looking at the pricing of materials and products, and also incorporating things like carbon and other environmental impacts into that design, and just running a whole bunch of simulations to figure out what the best outcome is. And I don't see that being very far away. That is really going to put some powerful tools in designers' hands to be able to get these answers. The most exciting thing about that is going back to the finance. It's all about optimizing design, including upfront cost, and then also projecting out operating cost and benefits. So, I'm excited about the potential of software to speed up that process and also to get better outcomes.
So you're thinking along the lines of, because we've already got energy software. We've got in Australia, we've got the star rating software that we use for building code compliance. We've got carbon calculation tools. We've got quantity surveying software. Are you thinking along the lines of something that incorporates all of those things into one?
Yeah, and the use of machine learning and
Into one
AI,
model.
and incorporating some of the things that is just changing so rapidly
Yeah.
now in terms of language models. I don't see it being far away that using some of that similar technology to get computers to do some of that hard work of running lots of analyses on early stage concept plans to do that modeling, because the modeling calculations are there. PHPP is so robust as a model,
Hmm.
but there's still quite a lot of manual input required. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think that there's going to be some pretty exciting changes coming from using AI to have better design outcomes.
For sure, for sure. And if you're an architect or designer out there who is not already doing energy modeling iteratively through your design process, then I recommend that you learn something about that, or get your energy assessor involved in your project at concept stage,
Absolutely.
to avoid nasty surprises down the track with the building code changes that are happening here in Australia. Despite the fact that it's now paused for a while, you are still much better off getting your energy iterations started off at concept stage. So if you have any questions about that, please feel free to reach out and ask me, but that is definitely a good idea. So if you could fast forward 20 years, what does a reimagined building industry look like to you?
Well, following on from what I was saying about software, I think we're seeing a pretty rapid escalation of what's possible with AI. Don't really love that term, but I think that the computing power is has got to be of benefit. I'm seeing a lot of convergence around the place, and it's interesting talking to people in California, then also talking to people in Australia. We've got some very similar risks there about things like fires, like overheating analysis. Eventually, we all come to the realization that physics works everywhere in the same way. So I don't know. I know that there's people like to do their own thing in their own space, but I see that there's a lot of scope for not reinventing the wheel and sharing as much as we can and making the best of being able to connect with each other and share ideas and not having to reinvent the wheel. I'm hoping that happens. I'm not.
You're hoping that humans get out of their silos. Is that what you're
Well,
saying?
yeah, we've had this weird thing about repeating the same mistakes. There's multiple examples of that in the building industry, but I hope we can sort of break out of that. And that's one of the great things about having a global community like Reimagine Buildings.
Did you see that Matt Risinger was in Australia earlier this year?
I did, yep.
He did a video. Did you see his video?
Well, I saw him
He did
mucking around with Dan Jacobs and playing with tapes.
Yeah. Well, Matt did a video after his visit to Australia talking about the abysmal state of construction in Australia, talking about how we are building here the same way they were building in the US in the 1970s. So talk about repeating the same mistakes. There's lessons out there from overseas.
Yeah. So I would hope that our vision for construction in New Zealand and Australia would be better than present day North America.
Yeah. And your massive impact idea, Zach, how do we accelerate, to use another one of the terms from you guys, how do we accelerate the industry here to fast forward past all of the crap that we are currently walking straight into and get to something better and move past all of the fear and the fear of change that we're facing here and the lack of knowledge. This is, if I had to put my 2 cents worth in for the biggest challenge that the industry faces, it's just education of the industry itself.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think fortunately at least there are now that's somewhat counterbalanced by the fact that there are good examples elsewhere, at least. And I think I witnessed that whole Brussels adopted Passive Houses Code in 2015, and before that, it had a bunch of policies that led up to that. The Icebox Challenge was part of it. Actually, if people who know the Icebox Challenge, that was a marketing campaign partly as part of that whole deal. And that there was a pilgrimage of people from North America who went to the Brussels region and saw that. They brought back their learning, and one of the first multifamily building built in Portland, Oregon, was by a developer who was on that trip. But also importantly, the code progress that happened in the city of Vancouver that then inspired the British Columbia. That all was like it from that experience, and that rippled over to Massachusetts and to New York and the Buildings of Excellence program at NYSERDA. So there's the possibility now to say, look at that. This is where we can leap to. That I think didn't exist in the 70s, because we were just like like they were figuring it out somewhere in northern, like in Canada, but it wasn't articulated
exactly
yet.
But
So
we don't have to do that.
At least that's the good news. Right.
We don't have to do that, but we still are.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, reimagined industry for you, Zach, what does that look like?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that really struck me when I was first learning about Passive House at Hammer and Hand, which is a company where they took fine craft really seriously, was this idea that Passive House was really about building better and about returning to getting serious about craft. And that's something that really resonates with craftspeople. So I think that there's an element of, so my hope that in 20 years is that there is a celebration of craft and the connection between craft and building science, and also a move toward natural materials. We've been, fine craft has been drawing on natural materials forever. That there's that, and that there's also a reinvigoration of the crafts of the trades, which is that's a challenge. I don't know if that's the same kind of challenge in Australia and New Zealand, but here it's there are fewer and fewer trades and more need for skilled trades. So I think that the reimagined building industry is one that is proud of craft and celebrated as a really attractive industry to get into, and just elevate, a little bit elevated compared. I think that there's we have this, and I as a parent, I'm guilty of this, this tendency to really, put on a pedestal the 4-year college degree. And we need to be also putting on a pedestal great builders and electricians and plumbers and all the
Definitely.
people who make these buildings happen.
I work with a bunch of excellent builders who take, their career extremely seriously. And a trade is an excellent career. And if you go into a trade, then you should get very, very good at that trade. It's not something that you do because you can't think of anything else to do. I mean, maybe that is the case. Maybe you fall into it and you end up with a brilliant career. But I think that if you're going to be a carpenter, then be a really, really good one.
Absolutely.
Or if you're going to be a builder, be a really, really good one. Excel at that. Throw your life and soul into it, just like you would if you were an architect or a doctor or any other career. It's just like any other career. And not only that, you're contributing to people's lives, their entire lives. So it's not something to take lightly.
I suspect with the AI thing that we're all going to be facing and living through, that the trades may be feeling pretty good about their choices in careers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At least until the AI goes into really agile robots. But anyway, that's a different podcast.
I think we're starting to see that trend. I have heard of a renewed interest in vocational qualifications because people are, 18-year-olds saying, why would I become a lawyer when, a lot of that work is going to be done, by ChatGPT fairly quickly, if not already. So yeah, I'm definitely encouraging my kids to look at plumbing and carpentry and becoming an electrician.
Yeah. Smart.
If I could go back, if I had to redo my career, I reckon I would do a carpentry apprenticeship.
Absolutely.
I think if I could go back to being a kid, that's what I would do. Because I always loved, making things. I always did the woodwork at school. I love being out on site now. Yeah, I think it's a fantastic career choice.
Some of the best conference presentations, the most memorable presentations I find are from builders who are very nervous about speaking because it's not their natural space. They'd rather be out on a building site, but they just give these really authentic presentations about being a little bit skeptical at first and then getting into it. And then at the end, being really, really proud of what they've built. And there's been a couple of interactions I've had with more senior builders who started building, did it for a few years, started to get a little bit worn down by the industry. And then for whatever reason, they got the opportunity to work on a passive house project. Often it comes from an educated client. And you see that they're suddenly reinvigorated and they sort of remember why they started building in the first place. And they're talking about this project that they've just done with that pride. I think there's a lot to that of
it's a really interesting point, Matthew.
And I've had that a couple of times, and I find it really inspiring to see these builders that would otherwise have just kind of retired and been a bit dark about their whole experience.
Yeah,
and then
they
get this new lease of life, and I think they suddenly realize just how impactful they can be in a positive way and really literally change people's lives. And it's very, very cool to see that.
Yeah, I completely agree with that message. And I think a lot of the builders I'm talking about that are getting really good at their jobs are the ones that are in this space because there's something to be really good at. Whereas you're just building building code level houses, so is everyone. How do you really differentiate yourself from others in that area?
And I know it's a big leap for an architect or a builder to put a line in the sand and say, this is what I'm going to do going forward. I'm not going to build stock standard. I'm not going to design just a code. I am now pitching myself as a passive house designer or a passive house builder more or less exclusively. That can be a scary thing to do, particularly, we're finding ourselves again in a time when there's not a lot of building activity going on. But those that have done that, it's really encouraging to see people making a business and being very clear about who they will work for and what they will build, as much as what they won't stand for anymore. And it's a viable business for so many people.
When I was first getting exposed to Passive House at Hammer in Hand, the late co-owner and co-founder Sam Hagerman, who is a lifelong builder, described Passive House as the unified field theory of construction. Like, he just felt like it brought together all these different disparate elements for him and combined it with this focus on really precision craft that that it just speaks to exactly what you're talking about, Matthew. The um, that sense of reinvigoration and excitement about the work.
I think we've got an industry that's kind of going in two different directions. We've got one part of the industry that is excelling and going down that rabbit hole and learning all of these things about healthy homes and passive house. And then you've got another part of the industry where, you've got fresh carpentry apprentices who are now working on steel frame buildings because, that's where the industry is going. Steel is cheaper, it's quicker, it's, all these other benefits to it, apparently, in the industry. So you've got this separation happening, I guess, in certain parts of the industry that is kind of going in two different directions.
Yeah.
Got to try
Yeah.
and bring everyone over to the bright side, not the dark side. So for people who want to be part of your movement, this whole gamut of things you've got going on, the podcast, the Reimagine Buildings events, and then the collective, how do they get involved?
Oh,
Did I get
yeah.
that right, by the way?
Yeah. Yeah,
Did I
definitely.
get that right?
There's
Yeah.
there's a lot there. There's a lot there. Come to a Passive House Accelerator Live on a Wednesday. That's Thursday for you in Australia and New
Yeah,
Zealand.
what time is that here in Australia?
Yeah, it's
Is it
not
like 3
great.
a.m.?
It
Because
used
that's
to
often
be,
the
yeah,
barrier.
it used to be, yeah, it is a barrier.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I engage with Passive House Australia, where you are, and then also connect. Yeah, that's why we built the resource, the Reimagine Buildings Collective, is to help people to connect. I think that the through line here is that, everybody listening probably has some thing in their mind about the next step they could be taking. I think it's really that what exactly that is different for everyone, but there's maybe this leap or this stretch that they could be taking. And I think what's important to recognize is that probably there are a lot of people who have taken that step already, and it's really important for us to seek community so that we can learn from those that have done this already, so that we don't have to be repeating the mistakes. I mean, kind of at that micro level of we were talking at the macro level about the entire industries from repeating mistakes, but I think that that's true for people as well. And I think that one of the kind of theories of change or organizing principles behind the work that we're doing at the accelerator and the collective is that when people share knowledge, it makes it easier for us to do this work, and it needs to become easier and cheaper and faster for us to do the work. And we do, and that happens because we're sharing information with one another. So I think that it's like identify those things, that those couple of things that you could be doing, the next steps you could be taking to are there, and then find community to help you take those steps. We're happy to be that community for you at the Reimagine Buildings Collective, for sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. There's plenty of communities around, and yours is definitely a really strong, inspiring one.
Oh, thank you.
All right, gentlemen, I think that brings us to the end of our conversation today, but there is one question I ask everybody at the end of our conversations, and that is, out of everything that you've learned in your career, what is the one thing you want the listener to know? Even if it's not what we've covered today, what's one thing you want them to know?
For me, I often tell architects and builders, people in the industry, about how impactful they are, because we spend around 90% of our time inside buildings. I firmly believe that builders and architects have more impact on people's health than doctors and nurses. and that can be both positive and negative. It's their choice. But it's an incredibly impactful industry to be in, and that can be very, very empowering.
Right on.
You're here.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that what I have learned is that the climate crisis is daunting and scary and dangerous. And we have really important, powerful solutions to the crisis. And that when we scale those solutions up, some astonishing things could happen. So I take again back to this notion of people learning from one another, the whole story of the solar industry and that mind blowing decrease in solar. The cost of solar power that's been going on and continues to go on. That is leading to uptake of solar deployment around the world that is absolutely exponential. In fact, in the last 2 years, we doubled the solar capacity around the world. So all of the solar panels, what have they started in the run up to the space age, right? That whole time until 2 years ago, we just built as much in the last 2 years, right? So it's nuts what's going on. And that's happening because of innovation, people figuring out the learning curves. It's called the experience curves. It's like there's a Swanson's law, Wright's law, different names for it. But essentially, every time we double the deployment of solar panels, the cost of those panels goes down by a certain percentage. Maybe it's like 25%. It depends on how you look at it. And that, drives more uptake. We can apply those lessons. I mean, buildings are different from solar panels, but we can apply those lessons to our work in buildings as well. So kind of following up on what Matthew is saying, we have agency and power to make a real difference in buildings, and let's recognize it and do what we can in the time that we have to make a difference.
Excellent. Thank you guys both for joining me today and for contributing your expansive knowledge and enthusiasm to my podcast and to the industry. Really appreciate your time.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
How good was that? Those two guys, Matt and Zach, are huge voices in the passive house and better building space. So I encourage you to sign up to the Reimagining Buildings Collective, follow the Passive House podcast, and go and learn from these two incredible people. That is all from me for now. If you are enjoying the content so far, I'd love it if you throw the podcast a follow if you're not already. Leave a review, and I will see you again in 2 weeks. Until then, happy, healthy building.